This is a TalkStation original podcast.
On this week's episode of the Paper Boys podcast, JJ and I speak with Brian Murphy of WRAL and Ariel Epstein of MLB and NBA TV. We look at the ins and outs of sports betting in North Carolina, which becomes legal in March. We talk about how we got here and what to expect going forward. It all starts right now on the Paper Boys podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Paper Boys podcast. I'm JJ Smith.
And I'm Zack.
We're reporters with the Carteret County News-Times. We are joined today by Brian Murphy of WRAL. Thanks for being with us, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Brian has covered the sports wagering deal here in the state. I feel like as well as anybody, if I read anything about it, I'm reading Brian, and it's been quite a long and winding road since you've been reporting on this, hasn't it, Brian?
Yeah, it's been a journey, quite a journey. Yeah. It feels like I've been covering it for years, and I guess I have. I mean, this dates back to 2018 with the Supreme Court decision, but really the efforts in North Carolina got ramped up in late 2019, early 2020.
Right. I remember I've got a weekly column at the News-Times, and I was reading your stuff, and you seemed really confident in that summer of 22 that it was going to go down. You and everybody else that was covered, and I remember I wrote a column like the week before the vote, and I was like, all right, here we go. We're getting sports gambling, and I think my headline was like, sports betting is heading our way sometime this summer. And then I had to write one the following week that said, never mind, sports betting is not heading our way this summer, because that went sideways quick, didn't it?
Yeah, that vote in 22 was wild. I mean, I've covered the legislature, I've covered sports, I've covered a lot of things, and normally these lawmakers know the vote count down to the the exact count.
Yeah.
And it just, when they got on the floor, things started unraveling quickly, and they didn't have time to salvage it. And so that 22 vote, will forever be etched in my mind, because before it, they thought they had the votes, and when it actually happened, they lost by one. And
yeah,
it was crazy. That was wild.
And it was convoluted too, right? Because they had two, and they had to pass together, kind of a deal, right?
Yeah, it was very complicated. The Senate had passed the bill, and they weren't allowed to change that bill in the House, so the House had to put all their changes or amendments in a different bill. Right. Then they had to pass both of them, and one of them passed, and then the second one failed by a single vote. So somebody switched their vote between the first vote and the second vote. It was a real. In fact, I appreciate you guys having me on this podcast. On Monday, WRAL and myself are launching a 4-part series podcast about that long road to sports gambling in North Carolina, and it talks about the Dixie Classic and the lottery and a lot of different issues. But a primary, one episode is really focused on what happened during that 2022 vote, how it happened, how talked to a lot of people on both sides about what was going on, and it's certainly a vote that a lot of them will remember forever too.
What's the name of the podcast? Where can people check that out?
Sure, yeah. It's called A Brief History of Triangle Sports. This is season 3, and it's all about the long, contentious road to legalize sports gambling in the state. You can find that. The trailer's up right now. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. And the first episode will drop on Monday, and those four total episodes. And the schedule's still a little unclear when they're all going to come out, but within the week, I think all 4 episodes will be up on wherever you get your podcast.
Nice.
That's a great idea, because there's only so much real estate for a story to list everything that happened and all the little details, and pods really give you a chance to dive deep.
Yeah, we did a lot of. I did a lot of new reporting. So I talked to the governor and a lot of people. The people that were involved in the lottery vote back in 2005, and there's a lot of archival clips from WRAL. Lucky to work at a place that has such an extensive archive, but also talk to, gambling addiction specialists and gamblers and just try to paint a longer view of what happened. I mean, this is a state that's been anti-gambling for a really long time, way back into the 1700s. And this, kind of remarkable quick shift into sports gambling. How did it happen? Why did it happen? And I think the podcast touches on a lot of things, but I think, you can trace it through the online poker boom and the daily fantasy boom, and it's sort of a technology issue as well. I don't get into quite all that in the podcast, but I think it's a fascinating story with a lot of different tentacles to it.
I remember reading some of your reporting, Brian, and there were other people at WRAL that was touching on it too at that time, and y'all were doing video and in addition to the online side. And I don't remember if it was you or someone else, but you had a great piece there where you were talking about the casino in was it Danville, Virginia, right?
Right. Yeah.
And the lawmakers were going up there to check it out, and when they went up there was all the license plates that said North Carolina, and they were like, oh, okay, we need to do something about this.
Yeah, I've done some stories on like the number, and in order to do this mobile gambling, right, there are geofencing, so there's ways to tell what state you're located in or where you are. So if you're in a place where it's not legal, you can't do it. But if you're in a place where it's legal, of course, Virginia, it's legal. So, I did a story about before the last Super Bowl about all the people, the number of pings that they're getting, these GeoComply, which is a company that does a lot of this tracking, of the number of pings right along that Virginia border, which are clearly North Carolina residents. That area is pretty sparsely populated in Virginia. Right. Those are clearly North Carolina residents going to a state where they can just get on their phone, and as long as they're hitting a cell phone tower in Virginia, be able to place those bets. The casino issue is an even broader issue, but yes, you're right. Lawmakers have seen what gambling is doing in other states, including right over the border in Virginia, and I think that's one of the reasons that they're pushing so hard to expand gambling options here in North Carolina.
I remember that piece you did where you noted that about the Super Bowl. I don't remember that the number was huge that people in North Carolina had bet on the Super Bowl. It was in the millions, right?
Yeah, I don't have that in front of me, but yeah. They got like hundreds of thousands of pings along, kind of along the border and on phones that they had traced to North Carolina. So, right. The way that sports gambling works, I can pull up the site here in North Carolina, but if I go and try to place a wager, it will block me. It'll say that I'm not located in a state where that's legal. So, they know which phones are trying to do that, and then they can also track, are those the same phones that kind of cross the border and place those bets for the Super Bowl or March Madness or the Duke UNC game, whatever it may be. A little creepy that they can track us so well, but it also leads to a lot of useful data.
Yeah, that boat's already left the dock, right? We're being tracked every second of our lives, I think.
The fact that my phone knows where my workplace, just pops up the map to work every time I get in the car is a little scary.
I think one of the most fascinating things about this is the fact that it's bipartisan in both directions, right? It's bipartisan in people pushing for it and bipartisan in people who are pushing against it.
Yeah, and that is, has a long history in North Carolina. If you go back to the lottery, which passed in 2005, it passed along, with the same, we're very divided along partisan lines on most issues, but these gambling issues don't divide us on party lines. They divide us really, left and right joined together to kill it in 2022, as we talked about earlier. There are, many on the right who are, morally opposed to gambling and don't believe the state should be involved in it. And then there are many on the left who believe it's sort of a regressive tax. It takes money out of the pockets of hardworking North Carolinians and puts them in the pockets of, these giant corporations that have learned, the algorithms to get you gambling and keep you gambling. And so, and in the middle are these, some Republicans who just believe that in personal choice and freedom, and this is something that's legal, and if you want to do it, you should be able to do it. And then there's, some kind of pro-business, moderates, I guess, on both sides who believe that it's good for tax revenue, and they don't want this money going overseas and into cartels and other unseemly organizations. So it really does scramble the political lines that we've come to think of as very rigid. In this case, they're not rigid at all. They're shifting constantly.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to see, Roy Cooper and Berger or any other Republican kind of shaking hands and patting each other on the back as when they're signing a law in place, right?
Yeah. I mean, this was very bipartisan. The vote totals, the effort, and then the fact that as we talked about casinos, Roy Cooper and Phil Berger are on the same side. They both are in favor of additional casinos in the state. It is a rare issue indeed where those two are completely in agreement.
How much of a role did the Panthers and the Hurricanes and the Hornets and these pro sports teams in our state pushing this? How much a role did they play?
Oh, they played a huge role. This was something that they were a part of right from the very beginning in the initial discussions. Don Waddell, the general manager of the Hurricanes, and the entire franchise, but Don Waddell in particular went and met with lawmaker after lawmaker trying to explain why this was important to the Hurricanes, how it would help them be competitive, how that would help their franchise generate revenue, would then go into the salary cap and all of that. I know that the Hornets also did a lot of outreach, trying to convince lawmakers that this was a good thing for them to do. And then, I mean, late in the process, after the bill had already become law, the teams and leagues in North Carolina were able to get a change in the law pushed through the state budget, which gave them a little more power. So they played a pivotal role in getting this done. And then they, for their work, they were rewarded with what's called these written designation agreements. If FanDuel or DraftKings or whoever wants to get one of these operator licenses, they have to have an agreement with a pros team or a facility like Charlotte Motor Speedway or an organization like NASCAR or the PGA Tour. And that really gave the teams, the Hurricanes, the Hornets, the Panthers, et cetera, a lot of leverage to get better marketing deals or to get better agreements with these operators. So I think the role of the pro sports teams was invaluable.
Speaking of the National Football League, I found that piece that you mentioned earlier. John Pappas, an executive with a cybersecurity company that works to ensure bettors live in states where gambling is lawful, noted that there were 1.75 million attempts in North Carolina to log into online sportsbooks during the National Football League season in 2022. So, yeah, 1.75. There's a lot of people in North Carolina who are going to be ripping and raring to go on March 11th when this is legal for folks.
Yeah, I'm eager to see kind of what the numbers are. I mean, there's a lot of projections that North Carolina is going to zoom right, not to the top, but clearly to the top 10, maybe to the top 5 of states where this is legal. We have 8 operators that are going to be able to take bets starting Monday, March 11th, and already seeing an extensive ad campaign, all over the state. But they're being very aggressive, and you have a state that has a rich tradition of sports. It's a pretty affluent state. I mean, we're not the richest state by any means, but we're not the poorest either. And you have a lot of colleges where we have found, study after study has shown that the college-age men are particularly interested in sports gambling. And so I just think there's a lot of ingredients in place that's going to make North Carolina one of the top states for sports betting.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the advertising. We are, as you said, being absolutely inundated right now. Is that because they're trying to get it set up, this foundation, or is it always going to be like this and we're always going to be just pounded by this advertising?
No, it'll certainly just hang in there for a couple more weeks, and I think it'll go away. It'll get back to kind of a normal state. I mean, I think, I've equated this, and maybe it's not a perfect analogy, but it's basically, 8 taco stands are opening right next to each other, and they all basically serve the same food. And so, how are they going to get you to pick one of those taco places over the other one? Well, advertising is one way to do it, and certainly, FanDuel, DraftKings have emerged as market leaders, but ESPN, MGM, Caesars, Fanatics, Underdog, these are all companies that people have heard of for the most part. And so that advertising blitz, all these promos you're seeing, this is a way for these companies that are all going to start on the same day to differentiate themselves and to try to attract customers. I don't think they expect people to download all 8 apps, but probably, if you're interested in sports gambling, you'll download 2, maybe 3 to try to take advantage of some of that. And so this is their land grab. They've got a bunch of customers. You just talked about 1.75 million people accessing the sites, trying to place a bet when they knew it was illegal. What are those numbers going to be when it's legal? And all these companies want a piece of that action.
Well, and JJ, you're right. The inundation of ads that we're getting right now, my algorithm is not designed towards a lot of sports, ironically, even though I'm on this podcast. It's just not. And so I'm getting them left and right. I bet our producer Ross is getting them left and right, who will certainly have no sports on his algorithm. And I can't think of another time where we've seen, it's not a brand new industry, but it's a newly legal industry that isn't necessarily available because of a major technological innovation, like self-driving cars or electric cars,
ChatGPT or something.
Right. But this is like a brand new industry that's coming here, and I think you said it best, Brian. You said the ability to recognize these brand names makes it a very different experience. Like, I think the only thing I can think of is like medical marijuana. If medical marijuana suddenly becomes legal in a state, there's going to be a similar.
Just wait.
There's going to be a similar land grab where everybody, but there's not the same level of visibility with those brands. I don't Right. Now, I don't know any brands or major corporations that sell medical marijuana, but I do know
FanDuel.
DraftKings. I know all these names, and so it'll be interesting when the day comes. I'm sure somebody will be measuring which app is downloaded the most, second, third, fourth.
Cream is going to rise to the top, right?
Yeah. Who's it going to be?
Yeah, no doubt. We'll get those numbers. I mean, that's what's amazing about this. We may not get download numbers. That's all kind of proprietary, but all these 8 operators are going to have to file taxes and revenue with the North Carolina Lottery Commission. And so in most states, and I've been following this really closely, but in most states, you get a monthly report of all the sports gambling that took place. So you'll get a composite number, whether it's 100 million or close to $1 billion. I mean, it'll be really interesting to see what that number is. But then most states break it down by operator. And so you'll see, FanDuel took 40% of the bets, or DraftKings took 40% of the bets, or these other companies are struggling to get 5%. So we will, and I'm sure I will be covering this extensively. We will know which operators have the biggest market share, and we won't know it necessarily in terms of downloads and all that, but we'll know it in terms of handle, who's taking the most bets, and then who's paying out the most in winnings, who's making the most money. All of that information will be publicly available probably within 6 weeks of launch.
Oh wow!
It may take a little longer than that. I'm not sure the exact reporting requirements, but if you look in the bill, the operators are required to give that information on the 20th of every month. So I don't know how that'll work in March, given that we're only launching on the 11th. But I would imagine by April 20th, they will have to file some sort of monthly report. Now, how long does it take the Lottery Commission to get that out, or me to request it, I guess? We'll see. But every month on the 20th, they'll have to file these reports.
Well, to give Brian's company some plug there, if you're looking for a promo code, I'm here to tell you, WRAL has got all the ones you want.
Yes, this affiliate marketing campaign that not just our website, but many websites are doing is pretty incredible. But yes, WRAL has all the promo codes for all 8 operators. If you just type that into your Google machine, you will get it.
Yeah, I was on WRAL last night searching sports betting, and man, the first 75 clicks, I think, were every one of these 8 or 9 that are doing it, and one was trying to outdo the other. I mean, it was like one was like $200 when you sign up. The next one was like, oh yeah, how about this one, $250? And the next one was like, how about $300? And I mean, it just kept going. I was like, wow, you can really make out here.
And it's fast. From a marketing perspective, it's very interesting because, like, do you go for the bottom line, the low cost customer? Do you go for something more exclusive, a little bit higher end? Do you know what I mean? There's different avenues you can take here.
Sure, that's interesting.
Yeah, and what's interesting is in many states, the companies have been able to write those promotional costs, those bonuses, those promos off of their tax bill. And in North Carolina, originally they would have been allowed to deduct, a portion of that for several years from their tax bill that they owe the state. But North Carolina eliminated that. I mean, basically they figured out, and rightfully so, credit to the lawmakers on this one, they figured out, hey, these companies are going to come here regardless. We don't need to incentivize them to come into our state and to flood our airwaves with advertising. That's going to happen even without any incentive. And so they eliminated those promos and the deductions that the companies can take for promotions. And so I was not concerned, that's not the right word, but I was curious to see if the companies would still offer those types of promotions, even if they didn't have a tax benefit to them. And lo and behold, as we've seen, as you guys have seen, they are certainly offering those promotions. Yeah. I guess it's more important for them to acquire customers than it is for them to get the small deduction on their tax bill. So.
I guess there have been plenty of controversies with this, but I know one was, the amount of money that's involved in all of this. I think at the time, I don't remember if it was last summer or the summer before last. It's hard to keep track. There was $1 billion I think there was like 16 or 17 states at that point had done over in excess of $1 billion in sports bets. But the amount of tax money that these states are getting is not equal or not proportionate. Not the numbers some people would be looking for, I guess, when they're looking for what the percentage of is. Some of these the taxes are not very high in some of these states, right?
Yeah, I mean, they go from as high as 51% in New York, which is just an incredible number, down to very low in Nevada and Iowa. North Carolina started with a tax rate as low as 8% in the original bill. That is, and plus the promotion deductions, their ability to deduct. Now it's up to 18%, and there are none of those deductions. And so that's a little bit higher. Virginia's at 15%. I think Tennessee is now at 20%. So, yes, but as I've tried to explain to many, many people, this is not going to be a giant revenue generator for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's say it makes $100 million in the first year. North Carolina's state budget is $30 billion. $100 million, and obviously, it's a rounding error. It's a rounding error, wow. And I hate to say that because $100 million for any of us or anybody listening would be life-changing money and generational wealth. But in a state with as many people as we have, over close to 11 million people, we have a budget of $30 billion. So $100 million is not that much. Secondly, unlike the lottery where you can bet $1 and win hundreds of millions of dollars, for the most part, and I have to caveat that a little bit, for the most part, sports gambling is you get what you pay, right? If you bet $100, you win $100. Now, certainly there are these parlays and sort of exotic bets now that they're trying to entice you to bet, $5 and maybe win hundreds of thousands of dollars, but that has about the same odds as the lottery. For the most part, if you're making a bet on a game, you're betting $10 to win $10 or $20 to win $20. You're not, and so even though there may be $1 billion bet in North Carolina, they're paying out, much of that in winnings. Like that's how a sportsbook works, right? It wants to get the same number of dollars bet on both sides. They collect their little 10% vig, and you bet 11 to win 10, and the guy who loses pays in 11, and that's their dollar that they're collecting on every bet. So these companies are struggling to make money. Now, look, I'm not crying foul or poor for them. I'm just saying that a lot of the money they take in, we see that big handle number, a lot of that gets paid out in winnings. And so the actual taxable revenue is much lower than the big number often screams.
I think a couple of the first summer, or what I think of as the first summer of the 22, I think you had the Tennessee at that point had done $370 million in sports betting and had only collected $4.6 million in taxes.
Yeah, it's not because that 370 number is not their revenue, right? That's just a number of dollars that were bet. And now look, there's another way that the state, North Carolina, to its credit, is collecting $1 million from each of these operators. That was the application fee, and that's for 5 years. So they're getting $200,000 a year from these operators. But also, if you do win, they're collecting taxes on you as a winner, as a customer, right? If you win over $600 in a single bet, you'll probably get a tax form from whichever operator you're working with. So the numbers are weird, but yes, you hear these huge handles, that you hear these huge amounts bet. It doesn't translate into a windfall of taxes.
We're only down to like a handful of states that don't have this now?
Yeah, North Carolina will be the 30th state, including Washington, D.C., that has legalized widespread mobile sports betting. I think there's down to 12 states that don't allow sports betting of any kind. Now, North Carolina has allowed sports betting in person at the tribal casinos for 3 years now. So we've never been on that list because we did have sports gambling, but it wasn't widespread and it wasn't something you could do from your phone. Now, so there are different categories, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I think there are only 12 states that don't allow sports gambling of any kind.
Do we get it, Brian? If Virginia didn't have it, if Tennessee had it, you think it would have taken a lot longer for it to come here?
I think so. I mean, I certainly, North Carolina didn't want to be the first on this. No, we never were going to be. But I also think they didn't want to be the last. It's pretty much the entire Eastern Seaboard now has it, at least north of us. Georgia, South Carolina doesn't have it. Georgia is working on it. Florida is working on it. But if you go north, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, they all have it. And so I think, North Carolina, given its anti-gambling history, I think we were never going to be first. But I think we were never going to be last either. There are some states, Idaho, Utah, that may never get it.
How about the casinos, Brian? How are they feeling about this?
Yeah, the Cherokees are, have been grandfathered in, and so have the Catawba, although they do not have an operator at the moment. The Cherokee got a 3-year head start on it. I think that's about the best they could have hoped for. Their partner is Caesars. Caesars is already taking mobile sports bets on the boundary in far western North Carolina, the tribal land there. So they got a little bit of a head start, although they can't take bets from Raleigh or the coast or anywhere else at the moment. I think the casinos are okay with it. I mean, there have been a lot of studies that show that this has not the introduction of mobile sports gambling has not cannibalized casino going. And obviously, there are states with both brick and mortar casinos and now sports gambling. And what they've seen is that it's sort of an amplifier. It doesn't detract. I think there are different audiences. I mentioned earlier, college age young men seem to be the target audience for sports gambling. That they are not typically the target audience for casinos, which has kind of caters to an older audience at times. So there does not seem to be a cannibalization between the casinos and sports gambling.
I would encourage everyone to, if they're interested in this, to keep up with Brian's reporting at WRAL. I'm sure there's plenty more to write about in the months and years ahead. The podcast he's going to have coming out, A Brief History of Triangle Sports. Brian, thank you so much for your insight today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, everybody. And I would just say there are problem gambling helplines out there. If this is an issue, I just like to mention that because this, for a certain portion of the population, I do think they may have some problems with this.
And a lot of the money being the revenue from this is going to go into those types of programs.
Yeah, $2 million for education and addiction treatment programs. And the colleges around the country, around the state, the athletic departments at many of the colleges around the state are also going to see a windfall from this. So that's certainly one of the stories I'll be following. Where does the money go?
Thank you so much for your time, Brian. We enjoyed talking to you.
All right, thanks, guys.
I'm Ryan Kelly.
I'm Lynn Schultz.
And we're the hosts of the Senior Moment podcast.
Each week we bring you conversations with experts right here in our community about the common and uncommon challenges facing our aging population and caregivers.
We discuss the challenges of caring for a loved one with dementia, as well as the importance of health planning, family history, and much more.
Join us every week for Senior Moment, streaming now on Spotify, YouTube, and at CarolinaCoastOnline.com.
I'm Brian North from News Channel 12, News and Sports Anchor, and you're listening to the Paper Boys podcast.
We're joined now by Ariel Epstein. She's with NBA TV. She's with MLB TV. She's with, Fanatics Sportsbook? Is that right, Ariel?
Yes, Fanatics Sportsbook. We just started it. Well, we just became that. I was with PointsBet Sportsbook, and then we switched over and got bought by Fanatics, who's expanding by the minute. And they will be in North Carolina next week on the 11th at launch.
So she's with everybody. At one point, she was with us here in old ENC. She was with WCTI 12 for 2.5 years, working with our pal Brian North. My gosh, 2.5 years with B North. I hope you were getting paid well.
Definitely was not paid well, but he was a great mentor despite the fact that I worked about 80 hours a week, probably.
Oh, wow. That was quite was that your first job?
My first job out of college and in TV professionally, yeah.
Wow. Talking about being thrown into the deep end, huh?
Yeah, listen, any job after that was pretty easy, so I at least got the hard job out of the way.
For sure. I'd talk about hard. When Ariel was down here, she was like all high school sports reporters. She was dodging people on the sidelines. She, was nearly killed. What was it, in Kinston when you got trucked?
It was Kinston-West Craven game. I was blindsided, came out of I was just shooting the game, got knocked down, got right back up, shot the rest of the game, went on air, and then realized that I probably had a concussion. But it took a few days for it to really seep in. It was really when I decided, I'm okay, my back and my neck just hurt a little bit. So I drove to Baltimore later that week because I had tickets for the Ravens Thursday night football game. And that's when things really started to go south. So found out I had a mild concussion from it. But it's all good. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Wow. Well, yeah, I was going to ask you about that later on, but you brought it up, so we'll get right into it. You're a native New Yorker, right?
Yeah.
And you're a Baltimore Ravens fan.
Yes, I know people get confused by that. So I'm from New York. My mom's from New York, but my dad's from Maryland. My parents met at University of Maryland. So when my mom and dad graduated, my mom said either you move to New York or we break up. So my dad moved to New York, but he brought his fandom with him.
Okay, and he just indoctrinated you from a young age?
He did, at least for football, not for baseball, because the problem he had is he didn't realize my mom's dad was going to take me to Yankees games all the time because he has Yankee season tickets. So that's kind of where I fell in love with Derek Jeter and the Yankees thing started.
Nice. Well, even though she got her brain jogged there in Kinston, she's kept her wits about her. She's had a meteoric rise through the sports wagering business, and she's known as the prop queen. And that got started. You were one of the kind of the first ones. Was it strikeouts that you were starting to hit on that really nobody else was doing at the time?
Strikeout props was the way I really got the prop queen name. It was what I made a name for myself for sure.
So next week, in the state of North Carolina, sports wagering will be live and legal. And how excited are you for us that here in North Carolina and your old stomping grounds of ENC that we can start using our hard-earned money for sports wagering?
I'm just as excited that you guys are getting sports betting as I was when New York finally decided to finalize it in 2020 during COVID. North Carolina is a second home to me. I've been approached by so many people from the state that have been like, okay, what do we do now? What apps do we get? How do we bet smart? And I've been on a few shows now for North Carolina radio and TV. It's just so exciting, and it's more exciting to see the hype that all of you guys are having over something that I love and my passion.
It's kind of wild that you've only had it in New York for, about 4 years now. It seemed like, you think in New York, you thought y'all been having that right after the Supreme Court passed that it was good to go. What do you think took so long? We know, we're the South. Know what took so long here. What took so long in New York, you think?
Well, I know it took so long. So Governor Cuomo at the time, he had a lot of relationships with the Indian tribes and reservations. The reservations did not want sports betting at all, because if they got sports betting on the apps and whatnot, then they think it takes away from the brick and mortar that the reservations have. But then when COVID hit, the state of New York needed money, and they ended up getting money from sports betting. Of course, it generated the most money of any state in its opening. New Jersey had it, which is why it was crazy, because New York was missing out on all this money by people going on trains and buses. Millions of dollars was being sent over to New Jersey because people were taking public transportation to New Jersey to go place their bets. I was guilty of it. I would drive through the New York to New Jersey border to place bets. I would take the train and place bets. There were so many ways to do it by going to New Jersey, and fortunately in New York, we're pretty close to New Jersey. Then New York finally got smart and realized, hey, we need this money because of COVID, and we're losing so much money, so they were able to pass it and get it through. But if it wasn't for COVID, New York probably wouldn't have had it for another 10 years.
Wow. It's funny when politicians see money going out of their state. I think one of the reasons we got it was Virginia is legal and Tennessee is legal, and they started a casino in Danville, Virginia, and politicians were going up there and checking it out. And apparently there was tons of North Carolina license plates in the parking lot, and they thought, oh, we've got to fix this fast.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you start seeing your neighboring states doing it, and then you're like, oh, we really are losing out on not making money off of this. It's the simplest thing to do. It's just all, politics. It's all about relationships. People don't want to ruin their relationships with things, just like Cuomo didn't want to ruin his relationships with reservations. Eventually, you realize just how much money it's going to make, and now New York's making billions of dollars off sports betting. I can't imagine that the relationships weren't worth it.
Yeah. It's funny, it passed pretty easily here. I think I don't remember what the numbers were, but it sailed through after years of some struggles. But there was people that were against it. You had on both sides, whether they were conservative or liberal, thinking for whatever reasons, and then it goes back, especially here in the South.
And then you guys were really close to having it a year or two ago.
Yeah.
They didn't want to let you bet on college sports, which actually in New York and New Jersey you cannot bet on the college sports within your state. North Carolina almost did that, where they weren't going to let you bet on the colleges in your state. Here's the problem, though, and this is what took so long in North Carolina also. North Carolina is way more of a college sports state than they are a professional sports state. No offense to the Carolina Panthers or the Charlotte Hornets. But New York and New Jersey, they're a lot more about their professional sports than they are about college sports. So that didn't impact. In New Jersey, you can't bet on Rutgers. In New York, you can't bet on Syracuse. Other than that, it's not really going to impact you too much. I know there are people during March Madness that complain a lot about this, but in North Carolina, if you couldn't bet on UNC, Duke, ECU, NC State, then what are you doing?
Yeah,
so yeah,
for
it was important that you had to be able to bet on the North Carolina college teams, because in some states you cannot bet on college teams within your state.
It's become so mainstream now. You can't watch a game without seeing the line. You know, there's so many sports gambling shows on the major sports networks now, but there's still some people that, you know, take an antiquated look at it, and especially of the older generation. When you started in the business, did you have any friends or older relatives or anybody that was kind of gave you the side look when you said you were getting into sports wagering?
Oh my gosh, of course I did. My parents' friends were like, "What are you doing? You're letting your daughter join this like slimy business?"
Right.
And my parents said, "Listen, she was unemployed. It's paying her. We're down for whoever's going to pay her." And here's the thing. Sports betting is just like any addiction. It's just like liquor, alcohol, whatever. There are a lot of other addictions out there that I'm not going to name because they're a little inappropriate. People deal with it, and you have to have personal responsibility. So if you know you have an addictive personality, then don't do it. They're never going to close down liquor stores because of alcoholics. They're always going to have a liquor store. You can't end industries because people have addictive personalities. My parents said, "Ariel's a smart girl. She'll know not to get in trouble with sports betting." Fortunately, I'm good with my money. I would never bet enough money that it makes me go broke or that I get into trouble with it. And there are times in this business where I go on a losing streak, and I actually, even though my job is to give out bets, if I know that I'm in a cold streak, then I either decrease my unit size, and sometimes I do stop for a little bit. There have been times where I take a little break for a week or two just to kind of reset and keep my money in a good place until I feel like I'm hitting my best again. I still handicap every day. So it's all about being responsible. But my parents, they knew that I'd be okay, but their friends were not. And then all of a sudden, the best part is when gambling became more normalized in the last 3 years, everyone says, "Oh my God, great job getting into that business when you did in 2019. I said, "Yeah, you got to move waves and make people a little annoyed at first in order to make a difference."
Yeah, you got in on the ground floor, it feels like, right?
Yeah, so 2017 was when pass laws were repealed, which allowed for sports betting to be legalized outside of Las Vegas. Then 2017, 2018, I think, was when New Jersey got sports betting. Then 2019 was when I left North Carolina, was unemployed, and a few months later dove into sports betting. 2020, I would say about a year and a half to 2 years later, was when New York ended up getting it. We always knew when New York got it would be the big boom. That's what really set off all the other states.
You know, it's funny. Sports betting is something that, unless you're really familiar with it, or you listen to a radio program, or like I listen to Bill Simmons' podcast and we talk about it. They talk about it a lot there. But I think for me personally, I don't think sports betting became a part of like the regular social lexicon until Silver Linings Playbook was the first movie that I remember where they talk a lot about sports betting in New York with Robert De Niro. That kind of opened up the window for me to see like this was a normal. People did this on Sundays. They placed bets.
The dad was betting.
That's right. Robert De Niro was big into it, and a large part of the movie was designed around a bet at the end. And I think it's interesting to see now. I wonder, now that sports betting is becoming more popular, will we see it integrated into TV shows and movies more?
For sure. Like The League, that was about fantasy.
There you go.
Where we have a gambling show.
Right. That's right.
And I'm sure.
We're starting to see a lot more of it, and you're seeing it. They include it into Sports Center. They include it now. I work for MLB Network and NBA TV. We have sports betting shows. MLB Network has me on almost every show on the network doing a gambling segment. There's not only the interest for the viewer, there's also money involved because these sponsors will pay. Also, the one thing I learned about sports betting that I did not expect at all when I jumped in, the interaction. When I jumped into sports betting, I looked at being a sports betting on-air personality as if I was any other like sports anchor reporter, as if I was at WCTI as their sports anchor, just thinking I'm on TV, I'm going to give out picks, and that's it. It turned out to be the most interactive way to communicate with your viewers. Kind of how a reporter is the link between the fans and the team. I look at sports betting as my link from like TV people into people on social media or your viewers. it's so easy because every night I'm on social media, living and dying by my bets with the people who tailed me on social media who I have never met before. I was out at a bar in New York City, and a cop came up to me. A cop from the NYPD came up to me, and he said, "Thanks so much. You've made me so much money. Let me buy you a drink." It happens all the time. It's not, and thank goodness they're not asking me on dates. They're asking if they could buy me a drink as a thank you for the money I've made them. It's such a fun thing to be a part of.
You're right. It's a huge social thing. And someone like myself, I've never placed a sports bet. And, when it does become legal and it's something that I can just get online and do, for some people like myself, what's a bet someone like me could make to get their feet wet?
Player props is always the best way to get involved because especially since people love fantasy sports, you could go and look at the player props. That was how I started getting into the sports betting business and learning it more. Instead of just betting the spread or the total or betting teams to win, if you look at player props, it makes more sense to us as fantasy sports people. So you could bet the over on points for an NBA player. You could bet the over on rebounds, assists. You could bet 3-point props. Those are, especially in something like the NBA, I don't really trust player props for college athletes. College athletes are too unreliable. You're going to also get in at the perfect time for March Madness. So you could start betting on some underdogs that you think could win in March Madness. Look at how certain seeds do against each other and which seedings have the most upsets. Maybe you can have a fun, you could bet for a team to win a game outright and bet on an underdog. Or you just bet the spread, which the underdog doesn't have to win the game. They could just lose by 7 and you'll be good and you win. So it's learning. I think learning the spread is what is the most confusing for people because there's the plus and the minus. And people get confused by what it means to have -7 versus a +7. And I think that's something people have to learn for college basketball because I would say my best advice for March Madness coming up is not to bet player props on any of these players in March Madness and stick to betting the spread or the total or the money line. But if you were to go bet a professional sport like the NBA, Major League Baseball coming up, hockey, then you could start betting on some of those player props. But yeah, I think those are the better ways to place bets. And I think March Madness is going to be a huge hit, and that's why North Carolina did it March 11th.
You mentioned a lot of terms there, and I think, it's become so mainstream. Like you said, you're on every MLB show or NBA TV, and we see the lines everywhere. Even though it's become so mainstream, and you mentioned some people are still confused by stuff. I've been watching sports my entire life, and I think I know a little bit about it, but I think there's something pops up from time to time where I'm also just, wondering what's that, what's this? Is there anything out there that people should maybe familiarize themselves with very quickly to know what they want to bet on, like parlays and the over-unders and the money line? And these people are going to have to become very familiar with these things very quickly if they want to know what they're doing, right?
I always say sports betting's another language. It's learning another language. You have to keep immersing yourself in it in order to learn it. Because if you don't go to Spain, you probably will never learn to speak Spanish. So I think the main thing, if a plus sign is next to a team, then they're the underdog. If a minus sign is next to the team, they're the favorite. That's the key right there. Then there's more to it. Like the spread means that it's more about win and loss margin. So when you're betting on the spread, if you're betting on the favorite to win, then you have to know, okay, so let's just say UNC Duke. UNC is favored by 3. Which means that if you're going to bet UNC -3 because they're the favorite, UNC has to win by 4 points or more. Now, you could take Duke on the other side as the underdog at +3, which means Duke could lose the game by 2 points. Duke could lose the game by 1 point. You just can't lose by 4. So I know this sounds very confusing, but if you are betting the spread, it doesn't mean that a team has to necessarily win the game if you're betting on an underdog. So that's why people will usually look at the spread. Or if you want, you could just bet for a team to win the game. And you could bet Duke to win the game, and you'll probably make a nice profit. But once a team is favored by more than 2 points, usually it's too much money to go and bet on them to win the game outright.
Are you familiar with the analytics on any of these apps or sports books, or have you heard? I'm just curious. I wonder what the average bet is for people. I wonder what some of the most popular bets are for people.
So it can vary, but I would say the average bet is probably like $50. But like I'd say most of my friends who have been betting in New York now and the only reason I say 50 is because you have to remember there are people who are going to be betting thousands of dollars a day on these apps.
Wow.
Then there are the people that bet $10 a day on these apps. I bet around $100 for my bet. But then there are the people, most of my friends, I would say here in New York, not to say these are the smart ways to bet, the public here in New York tends to do a $10 parlay where they throw together 3, 5, even my crazy friends will bet 8 or 10 things in a parlay. They put $10 on it. They hope to hit because these parlays, they can have a big payout. Now, I would tell you, from my experience in sports betting, the smartest parlays are moneyline underdog parlays and take 3 of those teams. You take 3 teams who are underdogs and bet them to win the game. I would do that. And according to odds makers, that's just, if you're going to bet 3 underdogs and bet them all to just win, which is called the money line, that's where you're going to get your most accurate payout. Whereas if you start betting all these favorites to win in a parlay, the numbers just aren't accurate. Like the payout to what you have to bet in order to make money just doesn't make sense. But if you just bet 3 underdogs in a parlay, then you are going to get more bang for your buck.
What's the craziest bet that some of your friends do or people in the industry that just they're stuck on this and you can't get them off of it?
Oh my goodness. Probably my friends that bet these 10-leg parlays. They always end up losing one leg, and then they call me. They said, Ariel, you're never going to believe this. I was so close to making $3,000. All I needed was this, and it didn't hit. I said, do you know how much money you would have made if you bet 9 out of those 10 things individually as opposed to throwing them in a parlay? He said, you would have had a great night. But people don't understand that you can't throw 10 things in a parlay. The odds of that happening, implied in the odds, are slim to none. Sometimes you get lucky and you hit a few here and there. Don't go betting these 10-leg parlays. 3 legs maximum, please.
Ariel, thank you so much for your time. And now that sports betting is legal in North Carolina, we're going to be watching you a lot more on NBA TV, on MLB TV, and Fanatics Sportsbook. Thanks for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited. And anytime you have questions, let me know.